Hello, and welcome back to another episode for Project Seed Money. My name is Sharissa Bradley, and I am so excited to be joined today with industry professional editor Dakota Nyght. Thank you so much for being with me today and spending a little time just sharing with my audience.
Oh, well, I'm really honored to be here and thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
It's
Yeah.
absolutely my pleasure. I want to just jump right in and ask, how did you get into editing?
Okay, so I started out in journalism and that was my background a long time ago, and from journalism I moved into technical writing. When I was in journalism school, I realized really quickly that I was really good at feature stories and drawing out, people's stories and getting at what made things interesting, but I was not a great hard news reporter because I really like it when people like me. And back when I was in school, everyone was like, okay, you're not going to get a job as a features reporter. So I was like, okay. So I pivoted. I went into technical writing. I ended up not completing my master's. I'm a thesis short of a master's there. But that was really, really valuable for thinking about things like accessibility and thinking about structure. And it really informs how I approach my edits today because you have to think in a really logical way when you're approaching technical writing and then think about how things are going to be read or perceived and all of that. Um, so yeah, I did that. And so I have been editing and writing in some capacity. Actually, I was at my school paper too back in high school, but it's like editing and writing in some capacity. God, 20 years now, more than 20 years. I kind of lose count for how long I've been in this space. I have jumped kind of in and out of it. I worked with some nonprofits and things. About 8 years ago now, I ended up switching over to freelancing because of life shifts. And I quickly realized that where my talent lies is in helping people refine and elevate their writing. And so from there, I also am a perfectionist. I don't even say recovering perfectionist because I'm just like, nope, there's things about this that are fine to leverage. And so, because I didn't come up through the traditional editing pathway through the big houses, I decided that I wanted to make sure that I really knew what the heck I was doing. And I already had a pretty good idea, but I went through the certificate that the University of Washington offers. And that was really validating because when I went through, I was already doing a bunch of the stuff that they recommended, but it expanded my knowledge base, and so that was really good. So yeah, I've been, like I said, editing, writing in some capacity for 18, 20 years now. It's just so much fun. I really, really enjoy working with people and the variety of projects that I get to work on it. It's great. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. And I love your path to it because it seems like you were kind of guided along all the way to get to where you are now and getting to experience the freelance world and different projects. I feel like it's probably never boring.
No, definitely never boring. I've worked on just in like the last 6 weeks, I've had both fiction and a wide variety of nonfiction books that I've been working on. And I love it when I learn something from the books. And I mean, I often do in fiction also. There'll be little factoids or things that'll pop up. And I don't usually do a bunch of fact checking in the work. It's like out of scope for what I do. But um, it is really fun when I'm Googling something and I'm just like, okay, is that the way that works? Is this the way this is supposed to be spelled? And just kind of like looking at those types of things they're not in the dictionary. They're, out there. They're sort of esoteric knowledge. And so, yeah, I always get to learn something and it's just really fun. I really, really love that. That's a
That's such a
favorite
cool
part of the job.
part of this industry. I feel like you always get to be learning, you always get to be growing. There's always new things. And I love that. I wonder, do you have a specific genre that you prefer to edit in, or even maybe things that you won't edit?
hmm So I end up doing a lot of romance. And I can do fantasy, mostly because I've read a bunch in that space. I don't get a ton of fantasy that comes to me, but I'm comfortable with it. And then also like sort of this magical realism, speculative fiction, think Alice Hoffman and practical magic, like these kinds of like it's real world, but it's a little special. And that is really fun. I could do science fiction, but I don't tend to take that on. And I I mostly refer my like young adult and middle grade stuff over to a really good friend of mine who's specialized in that space. Because you really want someone who knows what the genre conventions are for your book. So as far as fiction goes, that's kind of where that's my lane that I stay in. And then I also work in this odd intersection of what I call like spiritual self-help. And it ends up being, nonfiction, often business or self-help books that have this aspect of like, it doesn't go necessarily woo-woo, and I'm not saying that I have a problem with woo-woo. But it is like thinking about how you're bringing yourself to the work often. So that's kind of, it's like this more wholehearted sort of thing. I think I have like heart-centered entrepreneurs on my webpage right now is what I talk about. I don't do horror. I don't do thriller, and I don't do anything with excessive amounts of like gore or violence because I really like to sleep at night. That's those are kind of my limits. Yeah, but yeah,
That
hopefully.
is totally fair. And I do find that when you have something that's like specialty in your lane, the authors and the clients that are going to come to you, that match is going to be so well, so like work so well. So I think for our listeners, if you're looking for editors in the romance space or the spaces that Dakota mentioned, then I would definitely reach out. But otherwise, it does sound like you also have a network of editors that you also refer to. And I love that. That sounds like a really beautiful community.
It is. I actually just went to Author Nation here back in November, and like it's always enjoyable to go down there, because you get to get new information and you kind of see what's going on and you meet new people. But honestly, one of the most fun things for me was that this year the EFA was down there. And I always say the full name wrong. It's the Editorial Freelancers Association, so it's for editors, but it's also for other people who are in the publishing space. So there's graphic designers and there's formatters and there's indexers and everything in this membership community. But they had a table down there and I got to be part of that, to be on the informational table. And it was so much fun to just sit there and chat with my editors. I live in Montana. I don't have a lot of opportunities to meet face to face. And so it was just so much fun. I mean, I was like, that was the worth the price of admission right there for me to connect with other editors. And yeah, it's really, I have a couple of different cohorts that I follow or that I'm in based on like past educational things that I've done. So when somebody comes to me and they're like, okay, well, I'm in, this genre, I try really hard to make sure that it's a good fit if I'm not the person for them. Yeah.
That's such a green flag to me. I just love that. When you have community and when you have a network and other people are willing to vouch for you, that is such a green flag. I wonder if you would share a little bit with us about the onboarding process. Certain things like when should these authors be reaching out to you to get onto your calendar? How long should they plan to be working with you? And maybe even if there's certain types of things that you will or won't edit, like developmental editing or proofreading or line editing as they go through their journey.
Yeah. So I do a lot of developmental editing for fiction, or structural is what we call it, and structural and substantive for nonfiction. And then I do a lot of line editing. So one thing that I will say is a lot of people are like, "Oh, I just need a proof." Well, traditionally, proofing is actually checking the book after it has been formatted and laid out, and you're checking that PDF against the original version of the manuscript, and you're making sure that nothing got cut out, and you're making sure all the pieces are in the right spot and that, the page numbers are correct and all of this stuff. So technically what people are asking for when they want something like that before the formatting has happened is a light copy edit.
Okay.
Which is just kind of like my little educational piece that I always kind of like stick in there. So I can do like copy editing. I can do proofing. It's not my favorite, but I can absolutely do that. But the bulk of my work tends to be in that developmental, substantive / line editing space. So when people should come to me, I end up booking out anywhere between 2 months ahead of time to 6 months ahead of time. Other editors are a year out. So, if there's somebody that you've had your eye on and you're like, man, I really want to work with this person, it's always a good idea to reach out to them. I tend not to book more than probably 8 to 10 months in advance, just because life happens and you kind of, but that might change down the road. That's just kind of where I'm at right now. There are some editors that will book 2 years out, and it's like, that's awesome. But again, it's like, if you know that you want to work with somebody in particular, get yourself on their list and make sure that you're there. For me, I really appreciate it when people have an already completed manuscript. I don't do book coaching. It's just not, it's probably something I could do, but I don't feel like it's, um, again, we're going back to the perfectionism thing, right? Like, I don't do things that I'm not confident I can do really, really well. So I don't do book coaching. So book coaching is when your book is just not done yet. I prefer to work with a completed manuscript, or at least a mostly completed manuscript. And if you are really on target and you definitely know that you're going to be finished within the next several months, then you can go ahead and book with me. If you are not finished and you're like, oh, it's going to be sometime in the next 3 months, and I'm like, you should really just wait and then come back to me. And the reason for that is that I don't like hanging on to people's money.
Yeah.
And the writing process can be so variable. It's just, one person will just get through stuff in a week, and then another person takes 2 months, and that's not good or bad. It's just
Just
how it
is.
works, right? So, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, is like, if you're interested in working with me, talk to me maybe a couple months before you're sure that your manuscript is going to be done, and then we can get you on the schedule. And then as far as the process goes, what I typically do is I'll start with a sample edit. If I've worked with you before, then we can kind of waive this part. But if I haven't worked with you, I like to start with a sample edit. And developmental sample edits are not necessarily a thing, because developmental by nature is very holistic, right? But what I'll do is I'll go through a few chapters and I'll go, okay, I have a caveat. Once I've read the entire story, I might change what I have to say, but here are some things that I am noticing in this sample that you might consider if you're revising, right? And then for a line edit or a copy edit, I will edit 1,000 to 1,500 words. And the whole purpose of that is for me to evaluate the writing and get a sense of how long it takes and what it needs. Because again, sometimes people are like, oh, it just needs a proofread. And it's like, well, I would really recommend a little bit more than that. But also it gives the author a chance to see how I work, how I give feedback, whether the kinds of edits that I am suggesting resonate with them, because not everybody's going to be a good fit. And that's okay, right? Like, some editors are very prescriptive. Some editors are not prescriptive. And it's very just like, okay, sure, things, whatever, this goes. I tend to land a little bit more in the middle, but it'll also depend on an author's goals and what they're trying to do. If they're going to indie publish, that's a little bit different than if you're wanting to submit something to an agent. The expectations are just different. So in that sample edit, I'm asking about goals. I'm asking about, what your expectations are. Sometimes, actually, come to think of it, I don't think I've ever had this happen, but if somebody came back to me and they're like, man, you just way over edited this. This is not what I want. I'd be like, okay, that's a really good check for me, because then I can change what I'm doing so that our expectations are matched, and that's what I want to do, is establish, here's what's going to happen. Here's how much it's going to cost. Here's what it's like to work with me, and have a really good foundation moving forward. So that process, that sample edit can take anywhere from a week to 3 or 4 weeks, depending on how quickly people are responding. I try to turn sample edits around pretty quick, but again, sometimes life happens. And then how quickly they're ready to move forward. And then once that is done, then I do the proposal process. I send a payment schedule, I send a contract, an outline of everything that we're doing, and then we get started. Yeah. So, and then for me, edits takes anywhere from, it depends on the length of the manuscript, so a short manuscript is going to take less time. But I generally say somewhere between 3 to 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks if it's a really long edit. But it depends a little bit on what kind of edit it is. And then, again, the length of the manuscript. Like with the developmental edits, I only do one round at a time, because if an author is revising, I don't know how long they're going to need to revise. Whereas line edits, I have a really established process where I do a first round where I do all of the edits. I send it back to them. I ask them to review everything except what they want, reject and comment on what they don't want. So I don't do that again. and then I do another final round where I go through again and just try to make sure that everything is shipshape before I send it back to them. And then at that point, manuscript is usually pretty clean. I always recommend having a light copy edit after me just because having those fresh eyes is really good. But, some people don't have the budget for that. So I just try to make sure it's as clean as I can possibly make it before I send it back, which honestly, any editor should be doing. But
Yes. Oh, and that brings me so perfectly into my next question, which is what questions should they come to you with?
so I want to be asked about like the process. I want to be asked about payment schedule. It's my expertise is absolutely fair game. I try to be really upfront about what genres I work in and what genres I don't work in. There's certain ones that I just don't. And it's not because I wouldn't love to do it. It's just that the expectations are different and I don't have the amount of familiarity with them that I would like to have. And there are so many new books coming out that it's impossible to keep up with everything, right? So it's a lot better to specialize with an editor and make sure that their expertise and their genres are going to match up with yours. If someone's like, how much can you improve my writing? That's a really nuanced question because if you're a beginner writer, it's unlikely that we're going to take you to bestseller status right away. And so there's kind of this like back and forth, I actually end up having people fill out an intake form. Like
Okay.
that's honestly the very first thing I do. I should have mentioned that in the onboarding process. And it happens before I do that sample edit. And I ask about their goals and I ask about their expectations and what the word count is and things like that, because that kind of gives me a better picture of what's going on. I will be honest, it often ends up being me who asks most of the questions. And I think that that might have to do partly with my background, because as a features person, I was always like, oh, let me ask you about this and let me ask you about that. And so the starting point for me is like, okay, what are your goals? What are you trying to achieve? Where are you going with this book? Is it your first book? Is it your fifth? Is it your eighth? Like how much experience do you have in this space? Has it been edited before? Have you had someone else look at it? Has that person are they an actual editor that works in the editing space, or was it your mom or your aunt? Because there really is a difference between somebody who's like, oh, I like English and I'm a good reader and I notice things about stories, and someone who has trained to be an editor. And there's room for all editors in this industry. Um, but depending on your goals, depending on your budget, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, different skill sets are going to be more appropriate. So I wish that people would ask me more about, what's my background and what skills do I have and everything. To be fair, I put all that on my website. So, if people are reading my about page and they're looking at that, then they should have a pretty good idea of what I am doing and where I'm coming from. But that's also what the sample edit establishes is like, okay, yes, I know what I'm doing. So, yeah.
Well, and that's so key because even if you had like samples up on your website, it's not their voice that you're editing. So it is so key that you're offering this service of I'll show you what it looks like with your voice and my suggestions. And I think that's really key. I love that you want them to ask you more questions. I wish we could like put together a list for people. This is what you need to be prepared to ask. But I
Yeah.
wonder when they are coming to you and they are asking these questions, because like you said, you can't handle every genre. Not everybody can handle every genre. There are plenty of different editors out there in the world. And I do recommend that authors interview a minimum of 3 editors. I really recommend that for every field. So if you're getting your book designed or the cover done, I recommend always checking a minimum of 3 of that profession, just no matter what. So if
Mhm.
they're coming to you and I'm saying, they said, Sharissa said to do 3. So what are some of the red flag answers to those questions, like about the cost or the timeline or even genre? That way my audience can say, like, if they answer this way to a question, I should just run.
Right. Um, so just to recap, you're saying in terms of my answers, what would my answers be that are red flags for that person to run? Yeah.
Even
So
even just, like, in the industry, I should say,
yeah.
like, more so in the industry as a professional, as an editor who's in the industry, who has a network in the industry, I'm sure you've heard horror stories of other authors coming to you, and maybe they even went to a different editor and something happened, and then they ended up with you, and I wonder if we can kind of help these women avoid those pitfalls by sharing some of the things that would help them avoid that. So maybe they're not exactly your answers, but just bad answers in the industry overall.
Oh, sure, I can do that. To, like, anything.
Yes.
So, specificity is, again, really important to make sure that the genres are aligned, that the skills are aligned. If they can't define for you the difference between their different types of edit, I think that would be something that would make me want to take a closer look, because there is a difference between a developmental and a line edit. And that's not to say that I haven't combined those 2 things in the past when I've judged that a manuscript is far enough along to not necessarily need a whole lot of developmental work. But, I always tell my authors, I'm like, look, if I'm doing a developmental edit for you, I am not going to spend a lot of time on line editing. I will do it to show you what I mean when you're rewriting. So, like, when I do a developmental, I'm not just giving advice on, like, here's your story structure and here's these elements that you need to change, but here's also how you can change how you are writing the story to make it more effective, right? Like, it's part of my goal to help them improve their writing skills. But if I line edit the whole story and then they rewrite everything, like, that's a waste of their money and it's a waste of my time. So I don't want to do that. And so if an editor is like, oh, yeah, I'm going to line edit your whole story for you while you're doing a developmental, that's probably not a great thing to do. I'm never, never say never. There's probably somebody out there who does it and does it very well. But that would be something that I would say would warrant a second look. I have heard some recent stories about editors who refer people on to other things and then don't disclose their relationship with that other person who's a publicist or a cover designer or things. So transparency about, you know, here's who I am, here's how I know this person, here's how we work together, here's, those things. And this is a weird one, maybe, but cost. So I know everybody's like really worried about their budget, right? But editing is a skill and it does take time. I have invested thousands of dollars in continuing education, thousands of hours, thousands of dollars in making sure that I know what the heck I'm doing so that I can serve my authors, right? And if someone is offering a service really cheaply, like, I am sorry, but there's just a certain amount of money that you have to make per hour in order to make a living. And if someone is not charging very much, I would really question how quickly they're doing that edit. And it depends on what kind of edit they're doing, but that would be something to be thinking about. And I know it's really tempting where it's like, oh, well, this person's only charging, you know, 0.002 cents per word, which I have seen, but how many books does that person have to go through in order to make a living? It's so quality. There's the whole triangle of like time and quality and money, and you got to pick two. So, like I said, I tend to be a perfectionist. I tend to be like, man, like, this is what I want for people. So, those are kind of like the three things I think that I would be thinking about as red flags.
Oh, yes. I think that's very key. And I love that you pointed it out in the way that you did because transparency can be overarching into a lot of things, right? Like transparency about their price, about their contract, and about their process. If they're wishy-washy or like they're not quite settling in on this is how I do it, this is my contracts, these are my pricing, that is definitely a red flag to me because they don't know what they want or what they're asking for, right? So there isn't really a lot of, I wouldn't feel as certain about going with someone who didn't have that level of transparency. So I love the way that you said it because I feel that the red flags that you brought up can really go into all these different areas depending on the different types of questions they're asking. So I really appreciate that. And I do just want to ask where everyone can find your services and how they can connect with you if they're looking for editing in the 2026 year and forward?
Yeah. The very best way to find me is on my website. It's Dakota, my first name, Dakota, Nyght, NYGHT.com. And that's the easiest. I am a indifferent social media person, which I probably shouldn't admit, but I just don't tend to spend a lot of time there because I'm spending time editing. So it's like I am, and if someone messages me on that platform, I will see it maybe eventually and respond. But truly, the very best way is just to get to my website. And then, I've got a contact form there. You can get in touch with me that way. I will absolutely see the submission. And, if it's just an editing question that isn't anything to do with having a project, if it's like I'm looking for another editor in this space or something, then it's Dakota@dakotanyght.com is my email. So yeah,
Brilliant.
that's the quickest, easiest way.
That is so perfect. I will make sure to have your website linked in the description everywhere so that it is easy for people to find you. And you will also be featured in our Project Seed Money directory when this interview comes out. So if you are looking for a very easy way to get to Dakota, you can just go straight to the Project Seed Money directory and click right through there. I do just have one last question for you. If you could just share some inspiration for my audience, they are female authors, they're sitting on the fence and maybe they're grappling with fear or lack of courage, but I wonder if you could help inspire them to just keep going on their journey.
So the thing I want to say is that I have a lot of people who come to me and they're scared about the editing process, right? Because they're going, "Oh, if I have to be edited, it says something about my writing skill."
Mm.
And it's so not true. It is so not true. And there everyone's writing journey, all of these big names that we've seen, right? They all evolved from somewhere. And I will tell you that many of these big names turn out really messy drafts. And I've heard that straight from their editors. So, messy first drafts. Revision is the name of the game, right? And so, one of my favorite mantras is you can't edit nothing. So, having something on the page, it's easier to edit something when you have something instead of trying to edit nothing. So, it doesn't matter if it's terrible. I wanna say it's Annie Lamont that says, "Just get out your shitty first draft," but, it's just get it on the page, and then if you're committed to the writing process, it will turn into something. If you have the right support, if you just get it on there, it absolutely will turn into something, and there is an audience for everyone. I mean, there truly is an audience for everyone. So it just, yeah, keep going because we need more creative expression. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. We need more creative expression, and everyone can tell their stories in different ways, and we need it. I want to just thank you so much, Dakota, for spending a little bit of time with me today. And I just really appreciate your insight into the editing world.
Well, thank you so much again for having me. I so appreciate it. It was such an honor. Thank you.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me on another episode for Project Seed Money. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. And I will see you with another interview next week. Bye.